I don't think there's been a game that I played that feels as confused as Far Cry 5. My feelings about the game are complex, and it makes me kind of sad to think about it. I uninstalled it right after beating it, and there's some sort of uncomfortable feeling I get thinking that I'm gonna have to reinstall it to get some gameplay for this. Far Cry 5 came out in 2018, same year as God of War, Monster Hunter World, Spider-Man for the PS4. It was a pretty solid year for games generally, but Far Cry 5 is still considered like one of the top games from that year. It ran into some weird controversies. Some outlets were saying it wasn't political enough for a game in 2018 that took place in America. It just all kind of seemed ridiculous to me. I just wanted to stay far away from Far Cry 5. I was already not interested in the open world games. I'd already played a little bit of Assassin's Creed games, and that whole open world formula was not doing it for me. A year later, I saw the game was on sale on Steam, some very positive reviews, and I hadn't played any FPS games, or too many at the time, and I thought I was just kind of being, I was going to give it a fair shot. So I decided to pick it up, try it out, see what it was like. I got about halfway through the game, didn't really pay too much attention to it, and kind of left it behind. So now a year and a half later, going through my Steam library, and I find Far Cry 5 with about, 15 hours or something. That seems like a little much, but it's just sitting there incomplete. So I went back, decided I was going to push my way through, and it was an experience, to say the least. All I'll say for now, before I go into it, this game has so much missed potential. I think that sums up Far Cry 5. The core of Far Cry 5, like many other games, is the dual pillars of narrative and gameplay. I really want to dig into the narrative section. I feel like that's where a lot of the letdown comes from, but I think it's important to touch on the gameplay to understand kind of how core to the design of the game this incoherence starts. So this will be the structure of the following video. I'm going to give you the basic details that the game gives you at the beginning for the story, then we'll go over the gameplay loop, and then we'll dig into the narrative and show how both of these aspects, though they have some failings, they both are relatively strong, yet they struggle to coalesce into a singular experience, and each has major flaws that shouldn't be in a game in 2018 and fails to stand up to some other earlier Ubisoft titles even 2 years before. The game begins with a brief mini documentary going over the environment that this game takes place in. There is a major cult in this town in Montana that is slowly taking over and has finally overthrown the local government and is taking control of people's lives. Very authoritarian, very militant. So we see interviews that are all edited together in a very documentary type of fashion, and it's all well and good, but what's odd is they have this documentary footage, this undercover footage all together. It's all very edited into a very interesting way, and then it's revealed that this is not a documentary that's being made, but it's a report done by the FBI or whatever on this situation that's going on. It's a briefing that your character is watching on their phone as the wireless signal eventually doesn't work anymore. I think this is just a good example of kind of the core, kind of weird incoherence of this game. There's a lot of stuff that seems really cool or looks cool, feels cool. Just that documentary section is really good, but they don't need to carry it into the gameplay because that just breaks it up in a weird way. It doesn't feel normal. And there's a lot of other ways they could have done it. If they had just left it as it is and not tried to bring it into the gameplay, it would have been fine. I don't think there would have been any problem with it. It just comes across as weird. I don't want to seem like I'm overly nitpicky, but this is just a minor example of this consistent pattern throughout the game, where they'll bring in narrative portions and they'll break up the gameplay at weird spots to try to get you to engage with the story. Sometimes literally kidnapping you out of whatever you're doing to put you into story moments that don't really make sense. I think the story moments are probably the coolest parts of this game, but they don't coalesce. They don't go with the gameplay. It's like there's a movie and they just kind of like are showing you chunks and you kind of get to interact with pieces, but it's not a singular experience. Not in a way I've seen with many other games in the past. Before this helicopter section, this watching this video, you're asked to go into a character creator. I don't believe this has been in Far Cry in the past, but I'm pretty ignorant on the subject. Far Cry 5, one of the big selling points was the multiplayer aspect. So character creator is a big part of that, trying to get a way to customize your character and show it off to friends. The problem is, this has come up in a few spots in the game. I'm going through something and I realize that the game almost has a certain kind of player in mind, right? Like they have a way they think the character looks and a way they think that the character is probably a male or probably a female, most of the time towards a male. Like this whole review is gonna have spoilers. I'll probably put a warning beforehand, but in the very end of the game, there's a section where your character is chained up and there's a monologue that is said to you. Now, if you're a male character, it comes across as, oh, this is kind of creepy. And then I'm experiencing this and I realize if my character was female, this would come across very different. This would be a lot darker. This could be interpreted in a very terrible way. And when the writers don't have control over that, that's a little weird. They don't know their main character because you play their main character and they don't have any dynamicism in the writing like you would in like a Fallout or any other like RPG where you can change your character. The world can't react to your actions. In giving characters this freedom, they've kind of weakened the story. They did something weird with it. I don't think I have a problem with the game going as dark as it seems if you are a female character at the very end. The weird problem is though that they end it like that, and then from my understanding in Far Cry New Dawn, the sequel, Joseph Seed comes across as more of a redeemed character, which doesn't follow the plot of this game. So it's almost like the best parts of this game they kind of abandon, and the ending, it's almost implied your character was male because if it was the there's some very scary moments if it's the other way around, and I seriously doubt that's what they were trying to do, especially with the way they take the character later. All of that is to say, even something like a character creator needs to be thought of in the right moment, right? I was thinking, there were times in the game where I was talking to characters, specifically, there's a character who's supposed to represent like a right-wing political personality, and he's very rude to people around him. But if I was to play somebody of a certain background or made my character look a certain way, whether that be as a woman or somebody who wasn't the same race as him, the way he talks to people could be interpreted in a very different way. So were they trying to make him seem like he was a racist? Well, they don't know what race your character will be. And as you go through the story, he likes you more, generally, so maybe. But it's stuff like this where it's like the writers don't have control over this, and I think this is exactly where a writer needs control. They need to know the specifics to be able to write how they want to write. I don't know if I'm experiencing the story as the writers intended. The gameplay is getting in the way of that. So now we're back on the helicopter after choosing our character, experiencing the opening scene, and there's a conversation between characters. Now from this moment on, this is all going to be on rails. It's an enjoyable experience, I'll say. It introduces you to the mechanics of the game in an interesting way. That there's vaguely an open world section that starts this game is really interesting. It reminds me a lot of Just Cause 2 in a sense. I really enjoy that feeling. And then the game takes a hard turn and says, after a few cutscenes, well, we're not actually doing this on-rails experience, really. This is an open world game through and through. Here's the real gameplay. Well, fair enough, right? Like, they want to introduce you to the game, they have a tutorial islands, and then you get released into the greater world. Now, this gameplay is a good example of when the game wants to go into story, it has a very specific type of gameplay. And when the game wants to go into fun mode, or what they think is fun, the meat and potatoes of the game, there's a way you can do encounters out in the open. Like, there's a way my character counters people, maybe using stealth, running in, sniping from afar, sending in a dog to kind of distract or something. Like, there's so many things you can do in the open world. That's one of the really cool things about the gameplay of this game. The story parts don't allow you to do it as much. You aren't driving any cars in the story parts for the most part. You're not going into these big encounters. They're usually smaller areas. They're usually lots of enemies kind of being thrown at you, kind of spawning out of nowhere. They are sometimes or often they're underground in bunkers where there are only a few hallways, so it's very close quarters combat, and it doesn't fit the game. Along these lines, you also have boss fights, where every other enemy in the game it feels like a person, I guess, right? They die in a few hits. You feel like you're kind of weak, at least at the beginning, unless you upgrade yourself through the perk system. But the bosses in this game, especially, well, Faith kind of makes sense. It's all in this like drug reality kind of thing, but it doesn't really make sense for Jacob. Like, yeah, he can maybe survive a few shots more, but that seems kind of odd. I don't know, it just feels very out of place, especially for Joseph Seed. In his fight, he takes shots from 30,000 people, and it just seems very arcadey for Far Cry, a game that seems like it's trying to take itself seriously sometimes, especially with these moments. And on the side quest, they kind of goof off. But there's this separation. There's like tonal separation between gameplay and story. It seems like this rift that's never bridged. And it's really sad to see. So the meat and potatoes of this game come across like any other Ubisoft game. Large open world with little things to do everywhere. There are bases with lots of troops. You kill them all, and then it's free, and your friends settle there, and it never comes up again. It's a place you can fast travel to. That's about it. There are things to blow up. In a way, this seems like trying to make a Just Cause game, but very much more limited. Far Cry 5 actually feels like it's trying to emulate a lot of games in its design, but it doesn't seem to be getting any of them. For example, the open world and some of the mechanics feel a lot like Metal Gear Solid 5, but not many games have the flexibility or the sandbox feel of Metal Gear Solid, and Metal Gear stays pretty firmly in the story. It doesn't go too far off. There are a few odd missions and stuff, but Kojima has his own tone that he keeps when he writes. But this game feels like the side quests are written by one person and everything else is written by another person, and minor character dialogue is written by somebody. There's not a tone for this game. It feels like it's 5 different people who all went and did their own thing, and then they kind of just mashed it together. And that's why it's hard to say this is a bad game, because there are a lot of things that are done well, but it doesn't really make sense. And I guess coming back to these other games, what's in Far Cry 5 that I can't experience somewhere else? I think the major thing that they do offer is multiplayer, but open world, destruction, sandbox feel, all these things I've seen in many other games. What are they trying to do to differentiate themselves? And I think this is where the story comes back. Your game can be kind of average, but if you have a great story, you can attract people. And I think that's what's brought a lot of people to play Far Cry 5, is this story, which is tough. I'll get to it, but the story is one of those things where it's like, it's interesting. I don't understand these characters though. I've done a lot of thinking. I've been trying to understand, like, what motivates these people? And I can think of a lot of things like, oh, it could be this. Like, while I was playing, I was like, what if Joseph Seed had this kind of motivation? It would be kind of weird, but it would be in a cool way where it's, like, understandable, but then they kind of throw it away. And so he's kind of left as a mystery, but if he has no motivation that's visible to us, why should I care? And they try to convince you of his philosophy, but I don't know why. But I don't want to go too far into this because this is a separate section. So yeah, I think going back to the gameplay, there's story parts that are very linear. There are open world parts that are very open-ended, and they're very different, and it's weird to have both in the same game and have them both used for those separate purposes. What I mean is, I can see a game that would have sections that are both the small close combat sections and open world when it's not the story, and then do the story the same way. But it's almost like perfectly split, where it's like only story sections are linear, only open world sections are open, and I don't really get it. Right after beating this game, or as I was playing this game a little bit, I had gotten Watch Dogs 2, and I was curious, like, what is Watch Dogs 2 like? How did it do things differently than Far Cry 5? I'm playing it, and I'm really liking it, actually. It's a third-person shooter, but it's still open world, but it has this really interesting mechanic with hacking. This hacking allows you, though, to do missions your way. Even the linear missions have several ways that they can be done. You could go in guns blazing for missions, but you could also send in your remote control car, hack cameras, get what you need to get done, sneak in, and complete the mission. There's significant amount of freedom in that kind of gameplay. Far Cry has none of that. I mean, that's a little extreme. It doesn't have none of it, but it doesn't nearly have as much as Watch Dogs 2 had. As I'm playing Watch Dogs 2, I'm thinking, man, they really improved their game since Far Cry 5. And then I look at the release date of Watch Dogs 2, and I realize it's 2016. I mean, I know it's not the same studio, but like, seriously? Did they not try to learn from this game? That's really cool and really well done. Why didn't they, like, focus on this? So that really worried me, where there's a lot of potential in the Ubisoft design. It's carried over between a lot of their games, but like you have games like Watch Dogs 2, who are able to take the formula and they mix it up enough that there's something actually interesting. It's not just a gimmick, it's part of the core gameplay. It allows you to just tackle the game differently, no matter what you want to do. Invest in a different way. Far Cry 5 does not have nearly as much variety. You can do certain stuff, like you can sneak, you can use demolitions, you can go in guns blazing, you can use bows and arrows, you can use silencers, but in the end you're doing the same thing. You're killing everybody. You're killing everybody in one way or another. It's gonna end in the same way. But Watch Dogs had more ways of doing it and different ways it could end. And I think that's going back to Metal Gear Solid 5. That one felt like there were a lot of ways to tackle a target, ways that maybe the designers didn't realize. Going back to Metal Gear Solid 5, the quiet sniper fight, where there was an unintended way of doing the fight where you could call crates to fall upon the sniper's head and knock her out. Like, there are not a lot of games like that. You have Breath of the Wild, where they have a whole bunch of ways that the world can interact that's interesting, and you can do things that the designers didn't expect. That's not really a thing in Far Cry 5. I think you can get creative in some ways. You can like put like remote explosives on a car and drive it somewhere, but there wasn't that many tools that allowed you to be creative, we'll say. That was a real limiting factor. There were explosive barrels in the world that you could hit. There was some form of interaction, but most of the time, the most efficient way of killing somebody is throwing an explosive at them or shooting them, whether that be silenced or not. So, yeah. To say Far Cry 5 has no interconnected systems would be incorrect. I know I've mentioned a few, but I know one that they've been advertising for a long time is having different factions in the game's code for different animals and enemies. So often you can have, for example, in Far Cry 5, bears will attack humans, and sometimes you'll run into enemies fighting a bear running down the road, or a bull, which is cool. But that was designed from my understanding, from even the Far Cry 2. There's a really interesting video that was made comparing Far Cry 5's game mechanics to Far Cry 2, and it's tough to see and tough to defend what Far Cry 5 is doing right when they've done better in the past in a game that is much older. But I don't know, it's making me sad just talking about this. I'm comparing this game to Metal Gear Solid 5, and I understand some people will say, well, that's a game that took a long time to make, that's a very different game, but Metal Gear Solid 5 also came out before, I guess. It was building off things that were in the Far Cry series since around 2014 or earlier. Definitely earlier. Metal Gear Solid 5 feels more like an evolution of the Far Cry system than this game. So that's to say, Far Cry 5 doesn't seem to stand up to its competitors in any meaningful way, at least. Far Cry 5 has what I would call a broken meta problem. The game has certain, and I think a lot of games, Metal Gear Solid is also guilty of this, but there are overpowered strategies that are hard to get out of. I believe it was a quote from Sid Meier, who said, players will optimize the fun out of any game, and I think that's true for this game as well, that they have certain guns and strategies, specifically silenced weapons, that are really overpowered. Silenced weapons in this game are entirely silenced. Once you have a silenced assault rifle, there is no reason to use a bow and arrow, which is the core of the Far Cry franchise. That is the silenced weapon. at least from my position as an outsider to the series, like that's the one thing I know about Far Cry, is that there is a bow and arrow, and it's kind of made obsolete. You can recover ammo, and that's about the only thing that I found useful about the bow and arrow. So I found myself, after a while playing the game, finding out that there were silencers. I immediately bought one because most games that's really good. I'm using it, and I end up just using that for the rest of the game for the most part. There were moments and certain designs in the game that encouraged me to not do that. And so I was happy when those moments came, whether that was taking away all my weapons and forcing me to go out and find weapons or kind of get creative, or there were certain challenges in the game that you need to complete to be able to get more of these perk points. And these challenges mostly consist of getting a certain number of kills with a shotgun or a flamethrower or an explosive weapon, these kind of things. So in those moments, I actually had the most fun, but I wasn't able to consistently get that feeling because those challenges run out. Once you reach a certain number of kills, from my understanding, you can't get any more perk points out of those kind of kill trees. So once you've gotten kills with all the weapons, then at that point you just find the most optimal weapons and you just kind of stick with them. Is there a point to not using the most optimal weapons? Yes, probably to have fun, but you're not going to see a lot of players forcing themselves into challenging situations. That's kind of the job of the game. And I think that there was kind of a half fix there, and I'm glad that it was there. But if they had made something like silenced weapons aren't entirely silenced, they notify enemies within a certain range, so it forces you to go very long range or to deal with really close by enemies who are curious about the sounds. Those kind of things would have been of great benefit to the game, but there was none of that. By the end of the game, I had a silenced AK-47, probably a silenced pistol, just in case, and a few other things. High damage things in case things went bad. But there's also no damage reduction for silenced weapons either. They're at full strength. And the equip slot for like the barrel doesn't have anything that's of a lot of interest. I think there were a few attachments you could do, like maybe extend the barrel, increase your range, but I never found range a huge problem, and I just used a red dot sight for the most part, and that would do the trick. So it's really tough, and I don't envy the job of trying to balance this, but it's not like I did a lot of research to find this meta either. It was really easy to find, and it wasn't like there was another meta sitting out there that I had missed. It was, I think, what most players will go to. They will go to assault rifles because they know they're strong, especially early on in the game when they give one to you, and that's like one of the first weapons. And yeah, it does the job. So it's tough, but that's important for design, is to encourage players to play in a fun way. I think Doom did it probably the best, Doom 2016, where you were encouraged to play in a way that was fun, running around, getting glory kills, but there isn't an equivalent for Far Cry 5. They do it briefly for this challenge section, but past that, there's never a problem. They lock off some of these weapons with money, but when I was playing, money really wasn't a problem. I would just wait to finish some missions, and then I would just buy the next assault rifle and buy the next suppressor. That was most of my time with money in this game. Let me go back to silenced weapons. So in the game, when you're clearing compounds, there's an alarm system. So ideally, what you should do is you should turn off the alarms before anybody notices, and then you can kind of fight however you want, whether that be silenced, killing everybody off one by one, or going in guns blazing. So let's say you go in guns blazing. Then the enemies will trigger the alarms, and then enemies will begin to spawn in. Now, this encampment will take much longer to clear, as even after you turn off the alarms, once they've been triggered, enemies will still keep spawning for a bit, showing up to the compound. Now, if I was using a silenced weapon and I clear the area and clear the alarms, I actually get a bonus from the game encouraging my behavior of going the silent route, and they actually pay me extra money in game, and it's a shorter clear time. Why? Why do it like that? I can see that they want to kind of pose a challenge, right? Like, clearing it silently must be really tough, but with a silenced weapon, it's actually easier. It's easier to clear it with a silenced weapon than it is to go in guns blazing. So here is going back to, the game is actually, not only does it have a broken meta that has a minor fix to it, it actually encourages playing that meta and actually punishes you if you don't. They will actually keep money away from you. Money that, I mean, you could use to buy more weapons, buy a better rifle, buy more suppressors. They prevent you from getting it
because you weren't able to complete an area silently is just so odd. I don't know why they designed it like that. You could do a lot of different things, but why they did it like that confounds me, to say the least. Out of this entire game, there's one section where they take away your weapons. I think that's probably one of my favorite times. You get to have limited ammo, limited access to weapons of any type, and you have to escape a certain area. And I don't know, that felt really good. It felt like part of this game is supposed to be about the creativity, but they kind of give you everything, right? There's a certain amount of creativity that comes from limitations, lowered access to tools. I enjoy cooking, but when I'm asked by my family, like, oh, what do you want? Do you want, I get asked if I want a microwave, and part of me is like, I feel like I'd get really lazy if I had a microwave again. I like the idea of not having these things, forcing myself to, let's say, toast bread in the oven, or reheat leftovers on the stove. It gets me to interact in a way that is creative. There's a creative outlet. But to be able to be creative in this game, there has to be a lot of more self-limitation, self-discipline on the player to play in the fun way. And this is what this whole section is about, I guess. Why is the gameplay rewarding you for playing in a boring, safe way? And why does it make it so easy? Like, there's some games who have boring, safe ways to play, and it's tough. I can think of Dark Souls, where you can, like, be not aggressive, you can block, and just wait for openings and hit, but it takes a long time. It's not very fun. But Far Cry is the opposite. The safe, boring way to play is the easiest, the quickest way to play, but it's not very fun, and it's so confusing to me. So in Far Cry 5, there's a perk tree. The progression that it provides is pretty uneventful and forgettable. There's a few perks that will increase base stats, like your health, I think your stamina if I remember correctly, don't quote me on that. But they increase base things like the amount of bullets you can hold, how many you can loot, and there are a few that will allow you to do things you couldn't do before, like pick locks, or open safes, repair vehicles, trap them. Very situational things. Opening safes doesn't really come up very much. That's actually in the lockpicking perk, but they have the repair torch can also be used to open safes. The only thing you use that to open safes is when you open a safe, you get money, the currency of the game that you can use to buy weapons. And then there's also sometimes premium currency, which is silver bars or something like that can be then used to make premium purchases. They give you some of these silver bars, but it's not a very large amount. They are pretty scarce, and it's to buy like skins. There's a monetization system in this game that's not great, but silver bars are used to buy skins and various other cars, or to get access to weapons with other types of currency than the standard money they give you, which for the most part is just kind of annoying. You kind of roll your eyes at it. There are a few menus in the game that actually open up to the premium page first, so you have to actively go to a different page to access, for example, helicopters, which is really annoying. It really takes you out of it and just frustrating. This is a game that when it came out was $60, but has this aggressive monetization built into it for a game that is made to be played single player but has multiplayer. And I don't know, skins don't feel that important in this kind of game. It seems actually kind of odd to have skins, but I'm getting a little off topic here. The perk tree is really pretty boring. The bottom tree is all about decreasing times between when a character dies who you have with you to bring him back. So for example, if you have the dog dies, it'll be like 15 minutes before he can come back. But if you have the perk, it might be 5 minutes before. But they give you so many characters that you can kind of just swap them out. You might not get the one you want immediately, but it doesn't really ever feel necessary. Another tree increases your survivability, so you can increase your health. I found myself using that towards the end of the game just because enemies would down me too fast. There are other ones with increasing ammo capacity, reload speed for certain weapons, basically making you better at handling shotguns, assault rifles, pistols, any specific type of weapon. You get better at handling them and may be able to hold more ammo. So it's pretty uneventful. There are a few, again, that will do special things, getting the repair torch, being able to lockpick, and that's it. Those are like the best perks. Basically, lockpick, repair torch, and increasing health. Everything else kind of is very minor in their increase. There's a grappling hook perk that's pretty good early on, but it's like the first perk you pick up, or one of them. So it just kind of feels tacked on, trying to make it's the whole trend in games right now is to make every game more like an RPG. Progression system is really popular right now, but I don't think a lot of games understands why it's popular. They just really like the idea of having a progression system that kind of hooks players. So yeah, RPG progression systems are made so a character gets stronger as they go, and they feel stronger. I think of games like Borderlands 2 or Borderlands 3, where every level allows you to use a perk point to invest in getting a new skill that might make your build much better. It might be small incremental increases, but sometimes they're big effects like allowing your character to basically become an AoE character. There's a skill called Cloud Kill on a character in Borderlands 2 that basically made the build I was going for in a special challenge run much more viable. I was able to actually start doing damage to certain types of enemies. So things like that. Not to say that there should be some ridiculous like perks in Far Cry 5, but it just doesn't seem to belong. I think if they wanted to do something with increasing ammo capacity and stuff, they could have easily implemented some sort of crafting system. They already have a crafting system in the game for like drugs that I never ended up using, but they have animals in the game that drop pelts. What if you could hunt animals, get their pelts, and use them to unlock ammo upgrades, or maybe silence your footsteps a little bit more by making certain types of shoes, or like, these are kind of things that you can actually do. Maybe increase the number of weapon slots you have by crafting one of these things. Make it more difficult to get. Maybe have them do a side quest to get some of the rarest materials. Like, I don't know why it was a system that they used. The system that they used was really odd. The only way you can get perk points is through doing challenges and by finding these magazines. They're almost exclusively found in underground bunkers. Why? I don't know. There's not even a real feeling of progression through it. Like, I look back at Horizon Zero Dawn, I think that's what they could do. They could have something like that crafting system where you can like take bear pelts and turn them into something useful. But it feels like they didn't really think through this all the way. They kind of just said, we like progression systems, let's do it. And so again, I say this over and over again, it's sad. It makes me honestly sad thinking about this game. They have a great basis here, but they didn't build anything on it. They have some solid FPS, like solid shooting, solid movement, solid animation, but they kind of just made a mediocre open world FPS, and they kind of left it at that. Here I'm going to start to talk about the narrative of Far Cry 5. So we've kind of gone through the beginning section. Once there's that on-rails section, in between going into the that beginning intro and going into the main world, there's this section where you're brought into this bunker and meet this character. I forget his name off the top of my head. That's a bad sign. But he is kind of the radio controller. He's the guy who kind of keeps contact with you the entire game. He's kind of the thread. Like, if there's any character whose presence is known throughout the entire game who is not Joseph Seed, it's this guy. And this brings up a problem that's throughout the game, which is characters that the writers want you to have feelings for, want you to care about, you don't. And most of that's because they don't give you time to care about them. The game is segmented into 3 parts. Characters are usually only in one of those parts, and maybe show up at the very end. So for a game that, I don't know, doesn't have that many hours, it ended up taking me about 25 hours to get through it all. And I wasn't in any rush really, I was just playing the game. You don't get a lot of time with these characters. So they kind of rush these relationships, kind of try to find shortcuts to make you like them more. But there really isn't a shortcut for character development or for interesting characters. So we're left in this awkward position where this character who you meet in the bunker is killed at the very end of the game. And I don't know him. Like, it was surprising, but yeah, this is just some guy who's been talking to me throughout the entire game. I have no relationship with him. I haven't done anything for him. He hasn't really done much for my character. I don't know anything about his history. I would know if I read some of his logs in his room. Starting a New Game Plus to get some footage, I went through some of the logs in his room, and it provides some background for his character, but like, again, it's not super interesting. His background, I think, is that he's trying to fight the militant cult. His family didn't feel comfortable with him attacking them. It seems like he might have been a part of them and left.
And throughout the game, there are moments like that of a main character dying, a main character in trouble, one of these local main characters, because each region has their own cast of characters. And I didn't really feel much emotion for them as much as I have in other games. God of War, for one, is very different in the way that they develop these characters. They have very few characters. You have basically Kratos, his son, and maybe the witch in the woods. They're very limited, but you know each of these characters very well. So well, in fact, that I can't remember when I played God of War. Like, it was a while back, but I still remember all of this. For Far Cry, I'm having trouble remembering anything about these characters. And part of it's because you don't get any time with these characters. You meet them once in like an intro scene. You go out and you do missions. Maybe they'll come up in later, some of these later, like story narrative parts, but they might not. And then you kind of go back, and then they'll show up at the end of this mission area. Their mini arcs or whatever are kind of closed, if they have any arcs. Some characters have arcs, some don't. And then you're on your way, and then you won't see them again until the end if they show up there. And this is the same thing for every region. And I think this is something that the narrative was limited by the design of the game. The game is split up into 3 sections, each with a unique story that can be tackled in any order, which is cool, but it wasn't done well, and it kind of comes across as awkward, which is hard to say in a sense, because Breath of the Wild did basically the same thing, but Breath of the Wild was a much more open-ended game. It was a game that you could tackle the final boss at any moment, so I don't know what to do with it. It just kind of comes across as awkward. And for example, I'll give an example of a good character that was in this game, and I'll give an example of a character that I remember yet that's the most I can say about this character. So good character, there's a airplane pilot named Nick. He has his own mission, I think actually a series of missions that are all kind of in a row. You have to get a plane for him, he's talking to you over the radio. You have to defend his house from intruders. You have to save him from people who are attacking him. But in that time, there's a lot of interaction with this character. He later joins you as a companion, as one of these partner characters. So you hear him talking to other characters around you. It's very interesting. You get to learn more about his character through that. And he actually has some sort of interesting plot around his character. His wife is pregnant, so he's really struggling with living in Montana with this cult looming over, extremely violent, attacking his family, and he's ready to get out, and his wife has to convince him, hey, you need to stay and fight, and that's really tough for his character. And that's an interesting story right there, right? There's a lot you can do with that, and I think there's more they could have done with that character, but because of the way the game is laid out, it's not as easy, but that really hit home. He was an interesting character. There's another character, I forget her name off the top of my head. She's in Faith's region, and she meets your character for the first time. I can't remember the circumstances, but she basically walks by you and like curses at you. Really rude. This is kind of the way the character is made. And I was like, okay, like you could have something with this character. It's kind of annoying of a character, just like to be really mad at you for no reason. But you know what? There could be a cool development here, right? She could slowly begin to gain trust in you. Maybe she has some trust issues. Maybe somebody's hurt her in the past. That could be a cool story. But immediately after that scene, you leave and there's a conversation with her and she says, oh, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have been mean back there. Well, she's rude to everybody else for the rest of her time, but she kind of gives away her arc right there. Like 5 minutes into this area after meeting her, and we see exactly where she's going, and she really doesn't change. She's the same person, basically. She just is more open to being nice, I guess. It's really odd, and I was just confused. And that's my feeling throughout this entire game. I would run into something and I'd be like, that's interesting. Does this help the game? To bring it to like a cooking analogy, it's like somebody's throwing a bunch of stuff on top. Like they have a sandwich. It's a very good sandwich. And they hear that people like bacon. So they take bacon bits and put it on top of the sandwich. And they hear people like this salad dressing. So they pour it on top of the sandwich without any idea of why people like these things. These ingredients fit well in certain things, and you can mix things that don't necessarily seem to mix very well, but there's really not much consideration on how to mix them. There's not like a medium in which they mix. They kind of just throw things on the wall And sometimes things stick, and sometimes just things fall off. And yeah, I don't know what to say. I think one thing that I'm not the biggest fan of, that I've seen as a pattern lately, is killing off characters in order to make an emotional moment. I think killing off a character can be a very valuable tool for a writer. There's an investment that readers and your audience has to characters, where killing them off will make you like hate a villain, help you see characters grow. There's a lot of stuff you can do with that, but too often it's used as an emotional punchline. It's just, we need some emotion in this part, so let's just kill off this character that we think that the player likes. They do that a few times, and every time either I knew exactly what was going to happen, I know who was going to die, or I really didn't care, or both. Throughout the game, there are times where they make it super obvious that they're going to kill somebody off. Some other times, they just kind of randomly do it, and there doesn't seem to be a motivation behind it, but I don't know how I'm supposed to react. A lot of these characters I don't know very well. I may have seen 2 cutscenes with them. They may have talked to me over a side quest telling me to, I don't know, take out the trash or something. Like, something I don't really care about. It doesn't really improve their character, and I don't have any attachment to them. So when they die, I'm like, oh, wow, they died. And then I move on. There are a few games that get it right, and I'm tempted to name some, but I'm afraid of spoiling games for people. But Borderlands 2 has a few really impactful character deaths that I think are pretty well done. By no means do I think the writing in Borderlands 2 is perfect, but they were able to use it effectively to bring emotion into a game that's very lighthearted and have the tonal shift in there that was really effective. Comparing this to Far Cry 5, where the tone is just kind of out there. I don't know where it is. Sometimes it leans into silliness, sometimes it goes into really dark, serious places of people getting tortured and being flayed alive. Like, who knows? So, I found out there were a few times where I actually found myself hating the villains for what they were doing to characters, but very often it came across as just annoyance. So when John Seed would do what he did to people, which is basically torture them, I found myself despising his character, which is good for a villain. I felt like there was not much of a motivation for him, but he actually felt like a threat, whereas Faith and Jacob kind of felt like not a threat at all. They were just kind of there. They would come every so often and they would do their thing, and then they would go off, and I could go back to blowing up their, I don't know, what did they have? In Faith's area, there was like bliss centers. In Jacob's, there was these wolf towers or whatever. Yeah, so let's go into antagonists. So all of our antagonists are relatively interesting in some way. They either have an interesting moral justification, or a style, or character design, but I feel like the 3 main villains all fall short in a certain sense because I don't understand their motivation. I think at least 2 of them mention abuse as part of their motivation. And I don't know, that feels to a certain extent pretty weak. I can see that driving somebody to do something terrible, but killing so many people, there's a certain level you have to have a moral justification. And to a certain extent, it just seems like they're psychopaths. Which you can have villains that are psychopaths, but having a moral philosophy is what makes an interesting villain. To go back to Borderlands 2, Handsome Jack is a very effective villain, partially because he provides some sort of moral justification for his actions. He doesn't come across as the bad guy, he thinks he's the good guy, and he's trying to stop you. But when Joseph Seed talks, he says, we need to forgive them, or he uses these biblical verses to try to justify his beliefs, but it just comes out as nonsense. He says, oh, we should forgive them, we need to give them a chance to turn back, but his people are like shooting people. He's like, there's executions that are happening on the streets. He doesn't come across as honest. So when it's revealed that he is honest about this, it's just odd. It's just weird. It makes no sense. I was expecting throughout the game that Joseph Seed was actually lying, that he was making up this philosophy. I think that would be a really interesting, like, a way to take the character, that he is manipulative. That was a major part of Faith's line, was that she said that she was being manipulated by Joseph Seed. So why not? Why not take it the full way? You do a reveal at the end and be like, I know this isn't true in a sense, but this is how I can save the world. He mentions, I'm going to go, I guess, into his character now. He mentions briefly that he uses a justification saying, look at the government right now, look at the way the world is, we need some sort of order. And it's interesting because they use that as a way to, he actually specifically says, look at who's in the White House. Very political messaging, obviously trying to appeal to the audience. And that's an effective tool to address the audience almost and try to convince them, but it doesn't follow up with anything, right? Like, look at what's wrong over there, therefore you need to believe what I'm saying. That makes no sense. You're not providing anything. It'd be like me saying, look at how terrible pizza is being made at these restaurants, therefore buy my hot dogs. Like, there's no logic. If it was like a singular choice, if it was like this or that, then yeah, maybe, but there isn't. There's a wide variety of choices. Why do I specifically want to side with Joseph Seed? And I'm never provided that. So, interestingly about Joseph Seed is that in each section he almost has a reason why he has sided with each of these individuals, and each of these leaders are very different in significant ways. Faith is very much, she claims to be benevolent, she's very manipulative, but Jacob, on the other hand, is very violent and is all about survival of the fittest. And John is obsessed with making people pay for their sins. I guess he has a little bit more of a interesting motivation, that his motivation is almost just revealing people for who they are and wanting to expose them. I think that's kind of a cool thing. But when Joseph is supposed to be the head of this entire group, he comes across as odd. He, for one, apparently agrees to a certain extent with Jacob's survival of the fittest, but he's also leaning towards mercy. Well, how does that fit? There is no mercy in nature. It doesn't make sense. You don't see, like, little deer somehow be defended because they're little deer. They're eaten by wolves. And that's the whole point of Jacob. Well, that doesn't fit with John and Faith. So it was like the writers found this, like, idea. They were like, oh, it'd be really interesting to tackle this problem they might see in American culture, I guess. I think that might be what they were trying to go for. But just because something's interesting doesn't mean it fits. I think any one of these characters could be an interesting main villain or have Joseph have that philosophy. But they are so different that it just comes across as incoherent. They could have done something like, I don't know, each character has a certain thing, right? Like, they really hate, I'm assuming they're wanting to go with this religious symbolism. So we'll go with something like each one of them hates a certain type of sin, or one is obsessed with the afterlife or something. Like, you could do so many things with this, but they kind of just, they do weird stuff. I don't understand. There's a certain level that I think they're trying to do some sort of criticism, but the criticism doesn't seem to fit anywhere. And I'm kind of confused. I complete one part of the game and I think I understand Joseph's character a little bit better. Then I reach another one and Joseph seems to be acting a totally different way. He's really hard to put in place anywhere. And I think that might be what they were trying to do with his character. But it comes across more as that they don't even know the character they're writing. They're kind of losing it. Joseph talks about, in Jacob's area, there's a cutscene where he talks about having to kill his own daughter who is on life support. He doesn't come across as fitting his character, right? He talks about, and I think it's supposed to become this threatening thing, but he doesn't try to justify it in any way. He kind of just says, well, God told me to. And maybe that's what they were trying to go for? That these religious people are so convinced of something that they don't need a justification, and that's scary. But that's really weak too. I read books like Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky, and he makes sure in his book to, even people who disagree with him on religion, he does his best to represent them well. And just his thoughts about religion are kind of fighting in the pages of the book. The atheist brother and the religious brother, they have conversations, they have debates, they tell stories, they are existing in a world. If it's the case that this is what the authors are going for, it's very odd. It's like a caricature, but I don't know if that's the case. It's very interesting also because it seems to lean a lot towards representing Christian thought and ideals. Yet there are a few lines that confuse me. Maybe they're trying to go for a more general religious ideal or idea. For example, in a scene in John's section, they are asked to swear on a Bible, but they take away the Bible of the priest and they replace it with the Bible of Joseph's seed, like his Bible. Now, it's his own text, so it seems like he's trying to supplant himself, but he's also supposed to represent this figure that seems to represent religion in general. But this priest is fighting against them, so it's not all religion, it seems, because this priest is a part of the protagonist group. He seems to have good intentions. He seems to be willing to fight. And it doesn't fit. It's like somebody had a criticism, but then the other writers wouldn't pick it up. And so we have, again, it feels like there's too many cooks in the kitchen. Too many people are fighting for their voice. So I've spent a lot of time talking about all these different pieces. So I'm going to try to keep it short on John. John Seed is a very interesting character. John Seed is probably one of the better antagonists in the game. I'll try to keep this short because I've already talked about him a little bit. He has a really odd character for what his philosophy is. John Seed comes across as a kind of strange character. He, on one hand, is a lawyer, very, very uptight guy in a sense, compared to the other characters. Well, not really. Man, John Seed is hard to place. He has the nickname John the Baptist because he is into this kind of baptism theme in this area of the game, wanting to forcibly almost punish people for their sins or whatever he sees is wrong with them. And he's willing to put that onto other people. He's willing to say that your character is wrathful or prideful. And interesting criticism. There's actually something there compared to a lot of the rest of the game. However, they could have gone further with it, but they kind of fall short. John the Baptist as a figure is very he was a hermit, very disheveled. People thought of him as crazy, and you could have leaned into that, but they don't, which is odd. It could have been a really effective way of going about it, looking at this character and kind of questioning whether they were sane or not. That would have been an interesting take on it. Carried the themes a little bit better and kind of analyzed it from another angle. But again, they went a different route, and I don't blame them for trying something new instead of going back and continuing with the theme necessarily. But his character, the way it is, I don't see adding much. His character is his philosophy, but his background kind of doesn't really come into it too much. There's nothing about his lawyer background that changes the way that his character acts. He once was a lawyer really high up in the ranks, and then he comes back and he finds that doesn't fulfill him. I think that's the extent of that background. But other than that, it doesn't really help. That's kind of insignificant. And yeah, I don't know why. It could be really interesting to dive in and see all the different things that led these characters to this place, kind of dove into the backgrounds, but they're kind of left out. The reason I know this is because I was looking at different logs and stuff, and he was one of the more characters I was interested in, so I looked at some of the logs or papers, kind of listened more intently to his background. But that isn't as prevalent in the game as it ought to be. It's not fully deep into this character. It's just the character. And that's one of the better ones. We have then Faith, another leader of this organization, and she has this region up in the, I think it's more just east of the map. And Faith, her section is just all about hallucinations, about drugs. And her character, it seems like her character's all about manipulation. And that's kind of what leads this whole area of her game. That's the theme. She is manipulated. She's being manipulated by Joseph. She says so. Now, is it true? Who knows? She's a manipulator and shows us several times. And yeah, that's her story. She is manipulated and she manipulates. She doesn't really have a background. There isn't like an exploration. It's just kind of a cool gimmick that you can't really trust anything, that things will disappear when you fight them, that you think you're attacking a little bunny rabbit and it turns into a bear in front of your eyes. Characters are tempted by this drug that makes them feel good, and so they will do anything to stay there. It's an interesting concept, but the character behind it is really one-dimensional. It's this girl that is kind of lost, and she doesn't really seem to have any motivation. She just wants to do things. She wants people to kill each other. I never got a good reason. Whereas like John, I can kind of get an idea. There's something there. It's maybe just a shadow, but I can see something that he wants to punish people. It's a little weak, but he wants to punish people. Maybe if he had some sort of tragedy in his history where somebody wasn't convicted of a crime they should have, and maybe that's there and I just didn't see it, but like that would kind of complete his character. There would be something there. There'd be a reason, a motivation. Faith doesn't seem to have that. Faith just kind of has this skewed view of the world where people are manipulated, and so she just wants to do the same to other people. I was like, okay, but that's kind of weak. I don't hate her. She's just kind of there, and you fight her and then it's over. She dies. So, yeah. Jacob Seed has one of the more interesting philosophies in the game. They focus very much on survival of the fittest, something that is often linked with right-wing belief, and I think that's what they were trying to go for here, that there was this militant right-wing kind of feel to this, and it doesn't fit with any of the religious symbolism that's used throughout the game. And maybe that was on purpose. Maybe it was to show, oh, these don't fit together. But it doesn't come across as like a criticism. It comes across as incoherence. So that really confused me. His character in itself, he's a veteran of war. He came back and he saw that people are weak. And he wants to make people strong like him. And so what he's going to do is he's going to force them to become stronger and help save America by keeping the strong alive or something like that. And okay. Cool. I've seen thousands of these characters on movies, and yeah, it just seems like it's a different antagonist from a different game kind of put into this game. There's no reason why Joseph Seed would have him in the group, except that it's a relative of his, and he wants to be kind. But why would Joseph Seed have nepotism? No reason. He's a man of principle, so why? I'm confused. In Jacob's area, there is an organization that's kind of underground. They are called like the Wolves or something. I might be wrong. That might be Jacob's group. But this underground militia is fighting against Jacob. It's very secretive. They've hidden their base, and they don't want the coordinates to get out. And so there's this whole thing about, can this organization trust you? Because you have already been brainwashed basically by Jacob. And it's pretty clear at this point on that the way the climax of this whole area is going to be that this base is going to be revealed to Jacob and you're going to have to fight him. After one of your friends, one of these characters that you're supposed to care about, is killed. If that was enough, like, I can see that this is the plot point and it's pretty clear, but then they go even further to try to hint at it. And the way that hints work in movies and stories is you're not supposed to know what the conclusion is. They're supposed to get close to it, and then they reveal it, and then you have to realize, whoa, it was right in front of my eyes the entire time. But they made it so clear from the beginning. Throughout Jacob's section, they take you out of the gameplay, they put you in these story sections, and in these story sections, Jacob gives a brief monologue about surviving, becoming stronger, and he reveals that you were brainwashed by this song that he can play on a music box. He then sends you out, and then you do a shooting course. You shoot enemies, and you're shooting a whole bunch of them, and you're running through as fast as you can, and you have a timer, and if you kill enemies, you add time to your timer, but if you run out of time, you lose. And so the whole point is supposed to be that you don't hesitate when shooting. It's been done before a lot of times, and I don't think it's ever worked for a game that I've seen. There's been a few. I've seen it in Spec Ops The Line. I think it was supposed to be in Metal Gear Solid 5, actually, in a cut chapter at the very end of the game. And the whole idea is to make the character do something that they don't want to do. and then make them feel bad for it, which is a really strong idea, but in actuality, it doesn't work all the time. It has like a 50% chance of working, I think. So in this shooting section, you get to the end and you turn a corner and there's somebody there and you shoot them and the thing is over. Now, the first couple times you do it, it's like a mannequin. I think the first time doesn't happen. The second time you turn the corner, you have to turn the corner and you see there's somebody there and it's somebody without a face. Okay. And they do it a few times, and then of course the last time you do it, you realize that you're shooting the person that you don't want to shoot. It's the leader of this militia that's fighting Jacob. The problem is, for a few things, when you turn the corner, it's clearly the area inside of the bunker. So they kind of give it away. I don't know what they were doing. I know what they were trying to do. I don't know how you would fix it. It's just, yeah, it's something that's been tried several times. In Spec Ops: The Line, there's a section where you're bombing enemies using white phosphorus, and you kill a whole bunch of civilians. But there's no option for you not to, right? Like, I could see putting them into this situation, the players, and then giving them the choice. And maybe the choice isn't clear, right? To not pull the trigger is the choice. But that's not a thing. You can't not pull the trigger, because then the story ends, or they can't go through a plot point that they want to. I think in theory, in Metal Gear Solid 5, there's a section where your character loses the ability to see colors briefly. There's a bunch of people in similar looking jumpsuits, and your job is to shoot them, but you accidentally shoot the wrong one. And I can see how that could work a little bit better. That your character can't see the colors, but they know that they're in danger, so they have to shoot these enemies. And they can't risk it, so you have to shoot them all. And then maybe you can play around with it, where if they don't shoot one of them, they still die, and you can mix the orders and kind of play around with it. So like your character has to shoot the person that they aren't supposed to shoot. That's cool. I mean, I don't like it a lot because it kind of takes it away from the player, but it's fine. It'll work. That would be the best implementation that can come out of my head right now of something like that. But they use this and they force it upon the player, and we're left with kind of a bad taste in my mouth. You made me do something I don't want to do. You're putting the idea that I have a decision into the game, but you don't actually give me the decision. I feel kind of lied to, and now people are mad at me in the game, or my character, for something that was not my decision, but the game wants me to think it's my decision. So yeah, I don't like it. And then we're going to come to the end, I think, with Joseph Seed. We'll do an analysis of his little bits. He does a speech at the end, and he gives your character the choice to side with him or to not side with him, and all of your companions are basically held, or they're not held at gunpoint, but they're all under the influence of this drug that Faith was using, Bliss, and ready to attack you. So you can choose to join him. In my experience, I never chose to join him because I didn't really care to see that ending, but maybe it was better. Maybe it saved the game. Who knows? I chose to fight him. The fight is interesting. It's a fun fight, but it doesn't really fit in the universe. It's weird. You have to fight all these characters, and then you revive them, and then they're on your side. So I like the thematic element, that now you're working with all these people. This is a team effort. This is not all on one person. That's cool. I like it. And the weird part is the mechanics don't work. You're shooting people to kill them, basically. You're also shooting Joseph Seed, but he won't die. But everybody else in the game dies pretty quickly. And there's a similar moment in Faith's fight, but Faith is fighting you in this drug-addled dream. So it kind of makes sense. You're like, okay, this is a little bit more realistic. It just doesn't make any sense at the end of the game. Maybe you're high on bliss and something's going on, but yeah, I don't understand. So yeah, Joseph Seed's character is confusing, to say the least. He advocates for mercy constantly, but doesn't practice it except on you, your character, and that's a pattern throughout the game. The game can be tackled in any order, but consistently, after you kill so many people, so many of the leaders, they treat you like you've just killed none. there's no progression, I guess, except in little cutscenes. There's a few cutscenes that are slightly different, where Joseph Seed is talking. But other than that, by the end, when I'm fighting Jacob, he's more focused on using me to destroy this militia than he is on killing my character, who has killed or taken over 2/3 of this county. The game is almost over. Why is he still capturing me? And the same can be said in any part, because the game can be tackled in any order. The game doesn't really make sense to be tackled in any order. It's more fun maybe, but narratively it makes no sense. So, it's a shame. Joseph Seed, I still can't put a finger on his character. He'll stop people from hurting my character, because he says we need to have mercy. And maybe it's all for the end cutscene. It seems like it's almost like that. It's this prophecy he has, and so maybe he's so enamored with this prophecy that he's willing to let everything break down, but it doesn't make sense. And maybe he's crazy. There's different theories I had for his character that I think would actually really help. I think an interesting character would be like a pragmatist as this antagonist, of a character who sees how he can use religion to manipulate people and then uses it to take over. Maybe it's to usher in a world that he sees is good. He'll use religion to influence people. Like, that could be a really cool concept, but it's abandoned. He actually is a religious fanatic, a cult leader who believes that he is a prophet, basically. And there's a few lines that would actually really support that pragmatist character, but they kind of abandon it. It really disappoints me, actually. Consistently, I think back about that. There's so many cool things they could have done with this character, and then they kind of just leave him bland. He's just a cult leader who is really messed up. They show you what this character is like from the beginning, and you think maybe there's something hidden there. Maybe there's something really cool about this character. No, he's just the same as he was at the beginning of the game. He's a guy who quotes a lot of scripture and then blows things up. Yeah. There's a few weird uses of religion throughout this game, and it's not really clear. I don't know if I've mentioned this before. I'm kind of recording this out of order, but I think it was John Seed. He uses a reference to Islamic belief. He mentions Muhammad in a brief quote, and it's really odd. It's like they didn't want to specifically mention Christianity, but they wanted to kind of broaden it out. The use of using this own book made by Joseph Seed instead of the Bible, having a character who is a priest who is fighting against them. So I think I mentioned this before by saying too many cooks in the kitchen, but it seems like they didn't want to offend anybody, which very well, I can see. You want to broaden your product to as many people as possible. But you can also criticize something without, I mean, maybe nowadays you can't really do such a thing, but you can criticize things and not say they're bad all the way through, like this game. In this review, I'm criticizing their game design and their narrative design and how they don't really fit together, how they constantly take you out of the game in order to put the story at you, and both of them fall short, and then especially when they're combined together, they fall short. You can criticize something without a total destruction of something. Criticism is a vital part of like looking at something and analyzing it and wanting it to grow, wanting it to get better. You point out something wrong with something, not necessarily to see it disappear. There's such thing as constructive criticism is what I'm trying to say. And we live in a society where it seems like that's not a thing that people want to hear. That any criticism comes across as, I hate you. And that is not the case. I don't hate anybody. What I want to see is better video games. And this is just my way of pointing out this game fell short. And here are some ways that might help you improve. Here are some things that really failed for me. And I want this game to be better. And it really scares me sometimes when I see people say that they, I don't know, I'm just worried that people are going to look at a game and not question it, or look at anything and not question it, not say, how can this be better? What I want is for people to realize that video games can be an art, and it's a difficult task, but I think there are games that push that message forward, and the narrative is a really important aspect of that. Thanks for listening. If there's anything you want to put down in the comments, let me know. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on the game, what you disagree with, what you agree with. Thanks for letting me know. If you have any other things you would like to hear me talk about, let me know. Have a nice day, and enjoy it.